accomplishments, he led the business team in both COTS investment rounds and served as program integration manager in the commercial crew and cargo program office. Here to now lead a panel focusing on the emerging cooperation between space and Mr. Dennis Stone.
It's always great to do this after lunch when everybody's kind of going, Anyway, thanks for stopping in to digest and perhaps not only your lunch, but some interesting dialogue on a very interesting trend in our industry today. Our industries, because some would say we have the new space industry, and many of you are a part of that. Small, vibrant young companies that hope someday to become vibrant big companies working in the space area, and what we should probably call traditional aerospace. I don't like old space. It doesn't have a nice complimentary ring to it, so we'll try to avoid that term. But traditional companies tend to be big, very talented, much experience, more expensive, very different world. And the trend that we've seen, I've seen, I think you've all seen, in the last decade has been cooperation on occasion between NewSpace and traditional aerospace companies. And it's something new, it's something exciting, it's something different, and it could be very powerful. So the purpose of today's panel is to kind of step back. I mean, let's talk about some of the specific deals and things that are going on, but try to step back and look at this trend. You know, where did it come from? Where is it today? Where is it going? Is it good? Is it bad? What are the potentials? And what are some of the challenges and risks associated with that? And so to do that, since again, most of you are with the new space sector, we wanted to focus on the views of this coming from some of the bigger companies who are smart enough to realize that new space is an important asset for their companies and how they view this. And then when we get into questions, we want to hear your thoughts too on trends. So I want to introduce a panel starting from the far right, David Blackner, SL, the company that Space Systems, big satellite manufacturer. David, though, has got an extremely rich background, both in the business and technical side. He's been at NASA, at Ames, at JPL as well, the Stanford Research Institute. He's the director of the Golden Spike, so he has his hand in this space as well. A lot of great experience in these issues. Next to David, Eileen Kubik, is that right? You have the coolest title I think I've ever seen. She's with Airbus Defense and Space, and Helen's title is the head of Transversal Innovation. That's awesome. I love that. But part of her job responsibility is to figure out how Airbus will partner with small companies. And so, your position is perfect for this panel. Next to Helen is Kovacs. Les is from United Launch Alliance, the Washington office, where he leads the relationship that they have with the executive branch, the White House, NASA, DoD, Commerce, et cetera. Les has a lot of great experiences outside of Washington, such as the missile silos in Cape Canaveral and so on, doing launch operations. Was with Orbital Sciences, of course now Orbital ATK, as operations manager for the X-34, and for a subject I love dearly, the Antares launch vehicle operations at Wallops. So a lot of rich experience. Last but not least is Neil Curran, not least because he had a hand in sponsoring this panel. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. He is the NewSpace Business and Market Development Manager of Keysight Technology. So he actually is the only one that has NewSpace in his title. That tells you. So we're moving along. NewSpace is getting some recognition. His personal background is in digital signal processing and communications, and he's held a variety of positions involved with Hewlett Packard, starting with 20 years ago and moved on as things evolved, and today is looking at how Keysight can work with the NewSpace sector. So we have a great panel, looking forward to it. And so the format today will ask each 5 minutes or so introduction with your perspectives. Then we'll have a little conversation here in the panel and some Q&A finally from the audience. So I'd like to get started. Let's just go from right to left. We'll start with it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate the kind introduction. So, in many ways, SSL, Space Systems Loral, formerly known as Space Systems Loral, is a hidden gem in Silicon Valley. I think even before I worked there, I did not know much about it, and I've been in NASA games across the freeway. So it's up the road in Palo Alto. It's about 3,000 people, $2 billion in revenue, and what most people don't know is in between Apple and Google and Facebook and the next generation of Silicon Valley upstarts is this 58-year-old satellite company, everything soup to nuts, in a high bay in the middle of Palo Alto. So I also don't like the term old space. I don't much appreciate the term new space either. I think we're all part of the space industry, and you don't, see in biotechnology, new biotech and old biotech. You just see biotech, and there are different flavors of biotech. So, I like to think of this as a successful, commercial, revenue-producing aerospace company. And in the big scheme, we're very interested in, I'll use the term for lack of a better one, in NewSpace, because it's bringing a new level of dynamism to the industry, and it's indeed forcing us to look at things a little bit differently. So our primary business is 99% commercial. We don't do much in the way of government contracts, although I'll talk about a few. We build large, high-power geostationary communications satellites for what is arguably the most commercially successful business that is based in space, and that is beaming entertainment down to you. So your Sirius, your Dish TV, your DirecTV, your internet, even your cable service runs at some point through a satellite, and at some point often a satellite built by SSL or the community of satellite manufacturers. And most people don't know that almost every that you interact with at some point in the chain goes to a satellite. And I have to say that the SSPI, the Satellite Professionals Organization, that is, by the way, opening up his Silicon Valley chapter, has a great video out there that describes to you and at the level of the kids in your family what satellites do every day for the community and for humanity in general. So it's worth checking out if you want to understand the massive impact that I think most people don't realize satellites make. So again, we've been around 58 years. We build these large satellites, but we are very aware of and engaged with the NewSpace community. And I think the biggest signal to all of you of that is that we are building the Skybox constellation. So we've been engaged with them since before the Google acquisition. And they came to us through a competitive process where we were competing with your typical satellite manufacturers and some smaller upstart ones. And I'm going to make a little bit of a commercial for us, but the CEO, when at the celebration ceremony, came in and told us the reason we chose you guys is because we felt you were the most agile. You matched our culture and our drive and the way we do things more than anyone else. New space, old space, large, small, and that's why you selected us. So I'm very proud of that and I'm looking forward to commercial for. The exciting thing there is that Sky production facility is up and running, and we have a license from Skybox to manufacture the satellites or other applications that don't compete. So I think this is a theme across the industry. There are going to be a lot of platforms available. You can compare them to the iPhone or to your favorite, Silicon Valley flavor of the month. But the fact that there's a tested, repeatable, cost-effective set of platforms available to entrepreneurs is probably the biggest game changer in the industry right now. Because you don't have to be a space junkie, you don't have to be an aerospace engineer, you don't have to be anything special except someone with a business plan that happens to occur or have a component in space. And I'll conclude by saying we're seeing a lot of those come out of the woodwork. So we're seeing vendors of components for sure, and they come to large satellite manufacturers first because we're a potential. We love talking to those folks. But we're also seeing people who have really new, non-traditional, emerging business models. And that is very exciting. Business models that are hybrids of service, business models that look at different things beyond just Earth observation. And I think we're at the cusp of a very exciting inflection point for the space industry. And I think you guys are going to outdoor this venue next year. So we're very excited to be here. SSL is excited to be part of the NewSpace activity, and we want to see that inflection point. And I'm also excited to be with the fellow panelists here. So I'll end on that. Thank you.
ADB, I'm from Airbus Defence and Space. You probably know us also in Austria. So we also built a satellite, and congratulations for Skybox. It's really great. So we are also thrilled about NewSpace. We see this as an opportunity for the company. New business models, new technologies also, building satellites in serial productions, things like this. And I think to show you, our engagement towards the NewSpace community, I'd like to go to three things. The first, probably most of you have heard about OneWeb. So we've been selected by OneWeb to manufacture the satellites, and we've also into the company. So this is, I think, something very concrete and very strong. And actually, I'm also very proud, as you're part of Skybox, I'm very proud of being part of this new dynamism. And it's a huge challenge, because as you can imagine, building 900 satellites at a very low cost, it's a complete new design, it's a complete new risk analysis, and it's a complete new market. But we want to make space growth. I see it a bit like, digital in 15 years back. It started, it's a huge growth opportunity. You have global risks, so you know that lots of companies will fail on the road, but you also know that you need to be part of this new growth market. So OneWeb is one thing. The second thing, Tom Anders, or the CEO of the Airbus Group, he was there in November to visit Silicon Valley to understand the ecosystem, to understand the disruption of the space business and also all the businesses. And he decided, after 1 week, that we need to have one corporate venture fund, and we need to have an innovation center here. And just this morning, I was having coffee with the new head of our innovation center here in Silicon Valley. He's coming from DARPA. He was at Google, Nico, and we'll do with him disruptive projects in collaboration with startups, or not in collaboration with startups, but disrupting space data. We also have the idea is to, when we, what we've experienced, because we are discussing with several new space startups, is that actually need capital, and they also need our expertise. And we need them because they challenge them on our costs, they challenge them on our business models, so it's a very rich actually exchange. And with this arm, with this venture capital arm, we are able to strike deals with startups, saying, okay, we'll bring you your technical know-how, test facilities, whatever actually it's a case-by-case deal, but we bring you something. Plus, we bring you money, and we build a long partnership together. So these are the three things that I think show our engagement towards NewSpace. And very really thrilled to meet you and to be on this side.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Les Kovacs from United Launch Alliance. So I thought I'd show you some real-world examples of things that we're doing with smaller firms to sort of innovate our business, because we're one of the bigger aerospace companies. We launch all of the nation's national security satellites. It's an NASA payload that's then consequence. We actually launched all of the exploration payloads to the surface of Mars on our Atlas launch vehicle. So we have a pretty rich history of capabilities. So I wanted to give you probably 4 or 5 examples of people that we're teamed with, and actually I'm not a test guy, so I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of exactly what we're doing so that we give you ideas of launch vehicles to evolve them over time. And they told me this is my first time here, so I asked about the forum, and they said, well, it's sort of, the space is these counterculture version of what's going on. So I said, okay, I'll wear a tie. All right, so this is what we're going to look at. Right now, I don't know if you guys follow this in the press, but we are neck deep in a political problem with ULA concerning our use of Russian engines on our Atlas launch vehicle. So I'm going to give you a real quick rundown of what's going on there. And then that has led to ULA basically evolving its product line. We're going to introduce a new rocket called the Vulcan. And then those last 3, our relationships with Extor, Roush, and Maston are all very productive endeavors. And I'll show you what we're doing there. And it's really sort of, it leaps forward in what could be a step from traditional space into new space. All right, so Russia invades Crimea. There's an uproar. Immediately after that happened, I went to the State Department and I asked them, are you guys going to sanction any part of the U.S. space industry? And the answer was no, we're going to stay away from that. We don't want any of you guys to get affected. What ended up happening, though, is there was a pretty big backlash on Capitol Hill. And they said, look, you guys are dependent on Russian engines to launch. You need to get off of those. So we initiated a search for a new U.S. engine. And that's where we hooked up with Blue Origin. And they are very far along on development of a domestic liquid oxygen, liquid methane engine that's pretty revolutionary. And they're actually holding steady in the development. And so that forced us to accelerate our future engine options. Now we're going to evolve the launch vehicle. So this is maybe a little more technical than we need, but it does point out why integrated development of a product line is important. If you look back to the beginning of Atlas here, it was using American engines, right? We did, and then we added the Russian RD-180 engine to an existing rocket. And what we saw was about a 100-pound increase in our capability to orbit, to geosynchronous transfer orbit. But here's what happened when we took that same engine and we built an entire rocket around it, right? We evolved the entire rocket around that engine. We noticed a 4,000-pound increase. So from this line all the way down to the baseline of what the original Atlas was, 4,000 pounds. So very critical that in the launch industry that you evolve the overall vehicle. You're going to get improvements if you improve parts of a rocket, but you get the greatest improvement if you design the entire integrated rocket at one time. All right? So this is basically what's happening. We're going to get 20% more performance out of the rocket. The diameter of the first stage increases, so what that means is we can now attach 6 solid rocket motor strap-ons to the rocket, giving it even more capability. Right now, we're at liftoff for 867,000 pounds. We're going to get, that's the amount of thrust produced, 867. It's going to be 1.1 million when we incorporate the new rocket engines from Blue Origin. All right, and then I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but essentially it is a critical element of our evolution. We're evolving the product line into the out years, so we're going to have a next generation launch system culminating ultimately with 40 metric tons to low Earth orbit versus the 20 metric tons that we currently have. All right, so here are some examples of things that we're actually doing. We are teamed with X-Core. So get this, they are building an engine, internal combustion engine. This is a piston engine on a rocket second stage. Right? That is extremely revolutionary. It takes all of the complex plumbing, all regulated pressures, temperatures, and flow rates that you normally see in a rocket engine, and it simplifies them to, and I don't want to overstate this, but pretty close to what you find in your automobile engine. So, when you normally in a rocket have turbo machinery spinning at thousands of RPMs, that's now spinning at piston, I don't know why this is happening, it's spinning at piston rates of speed. So you're mitigating a lot of the temperature problems that you normally have, a lot of your pressure problems, right? You can stop and start it as many times as you want. All right, so that we're doing that with X-Core. And it's going to reduce our costs by about 80%, and it's 3,000 pounds of thrust in the demonstrator. So we're making a lot of progress. All right. Integrated Vehicle Fluids. Roush is a company that does some rocket-powered aircraft engines. They are actually helping us out. On a rocket, the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen gases, when they boil off, they're basically vented in their waste. What we're going to do is we're going to capture those gases. It's going to run this Roush engine, and it basically takes all of the stuff that's on the back end of a rocket now and it gets rid of it, and it cleans up the whole back end of your launch vehicle. It's going to give us about 500 to 1,000 pounds more capability. That is significant in the rocket world. All right, and then the Maston Experimental Enhanced Upper Stage, we have provided Maston with a Centaur upper stage. They're going to put structure on the outside of it, beef up the inside, and we're going to use it to deliver cargo. So their extensive experience in vertical takeoff and vertical landing is going to permit them to actually deliver payload mass to the surface of the moon. So when this is all complete, if you fly it on NASA's SLS, we're talking about 10 metric tons to the surface of the moon. Right? If you fly it on a Delta IV Heavy, it's 1.5 metric tons. So pretty significant capability. So those are our relationships with NewSpace companies. We think it's the key to our future for our survival. We cannot remain competitive just banking on our relationship with the national security space. All right, thank you.
Is that one working? Okay, this is the one with the delay Mitch was struggling with earlier. Okay, so first off, I guess I'd like to thank everybody for coming here. As Dennis mentioned, Keysight Technologies, we are the sponsor of this session, and we're really happy to be here and happy to enable this panel. I wanted to start with giving a little bit of an introduction of who we are. I think that there's probably a few people here who know who Keysight is. There's probably a lot more people who knew us in under our previous names. And so I give a little bit of history, and I think that'll give you a pretty good introduction to the company. So for those of you that are familiar with the story of the birth of Silicon Valley, it's widely believed to be have occurred in a garage in Palo Alto by two guys named Bill Hewlett and David Packard. And so they formed Hewlett-Packard in 1939. And what a lot of people don't necessarily know, what Bill and Dave were working on in that garage was not a computer, and it wasn't a printer, it was electronic test equipment. And so electronic test equipment really was the core of Hewlett-Packard for the first 25 to 30 years of the company. And through that, Bill and Dave got into plotters for plotting the data that came from electronic test equipment. And they got into computers to build test systems to control the instruments for electronic test equipment. And then, of course, computing and printing became massive businesses, and Hewlett-Packard continued. And we continued in electronic test and measurement, branched out into some other forms of measurement science as well. And in 1999, the company had grown to roughly $40 billion, very, very large company. And at that time, they decided to split the company into two pieces and spin off Agilent Technologies. And at that time, Agilent Technologies was purely based on measurements, but not exclusively electronics measurements. It was included some medical measurements and life sciences measurements and so forth, but was a measurement company. And after that, we continued to grow as a very large company. And we grew and grew, by about 2000, late part of 2013, we'd grown to about a $6 billion company. At which time, they decided, well, we split once, let's split again. And so we did that. Basically, what we did is we split Agilent into roughly two equal-sized pieces. One kept the Agilent name, and that's a life sciences company. And the other is us, the electronic measurements company, Keysight Technologies. So we trace our roots as an electronic measurement company all the way back to that garage that founded Silicon Valley. And so kind of the core of the company, we like to think of ourselves as a 75-year-old startup and a 75-year-old $3 billion startup. So, and we are totally focused on electronic measurement, and we continue to be the leading provider of electronic design and test tools in the world. So that's a bit of an introduction of who we are. And interestingly, as part of that, let me see if I can actually advance the slides. That worked. Oops, do it twice. There we go. So in that, we are an electronic measurements company. So we serve a lot of different industries. We serve the aerospace industry, and we have served the space industry with electronic test tools throughout the history of the space industry. We also serve the commercial electronics industry, wireless communications, wireline communications, all sort of computing and so forth. So in that sense, we are not a space company per se, as my fellow panelists are. But I've now spent a reasonable amount of time in this industry, and some observations I've had with respect to this whole new space, traditional space, old space kind of thing. Really, I don't see it as a black and white thing, and I think that's kind of the gist of most of the conversations today, is it's not, oh, there's completely two separate camps, one being new space and one being traditional space. I see it more of a continuum. And while there are some traditional space companies that are taking up a defensive posture, and there are some new space companies that are really almost anti-old space, I would say for the most part what I have seen is most companies lie somewhere in between, and there's mostly a collaborative approach. There certainly are some cultural and demographic differences, and I think one of the panels earlier today was pointing out how if it weren't for all of a sudden this new space influx of young engineering talent, the median age group, the median age in our industry would be well into the 50s. And luckily now we have a bunch of new talent coming in that's pulling that number down a little bit. But certainly some demographic differences between the two. And as I said, I really see, and I think Dennis, you mentioned this as well, the spirit is very much turning to collaboration. I think if we look at my fellow panelists, certainly they're all very involved in collaborations between traditional space and new space. So from my perspective as an electronic measurements guy, What does that mean for electronic design and test? What are the implications of NewSpace and the trend of NewSpace and how that relates to traditional space? Well, most of the NewSpace business models that I've seen really drive an approach to electronic design and test that's frankly more consistent with commercial electronics than it is with traditional aerospace. Now that said, it's still space. I mean, there still are the constraints and the difficulties and all the challenges associated with space. So what we see as required for a successful strategy and approach to electronic design and test for NewSpace is really a combination of the best practices from the commercial industry combined with the lessons learned and the technology and innovation associated with traditional space as well. And what that balance looks like, how commercial it is versus how traditional it is, really is a balance that's going to be dictated by the specific NewSpace business model. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. It really will be a bit of a continuum between commercial practices and traditional aerospace practices. Okay, so that's what I have. And again, thank you everyone for attending.
Is this on? We could get a couple more working mics up here. That would cut down on the game of pass the mic. That would be great. That would maybe have a little fireside chat here among ourselves, discussion. Then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. So we'll be thinking about your questions as well as your comments. But we touched upon many interesting facets, maybe not black and white. I was thinking you mentioned biotech. This is almost like biotech versus big pharma in a way. You know, one often gets innovation from the other. Overall, as we step back and look at this partnership that's growing between space and traditional space, if I can use those terms, what are the pros and cons? What are the opportunities, the advantages of these of entry from each of those sectors, if you will, working together? And what are the challenges? What are the obstacles that they face? So maybe a comment from each member of the panel, pros and cons of these partners.
I think what I've seen from again, obviously my view of the world from an electronic perspective, is one of the pros is that I believe that for lack of a better term, the NewSpace players are driving the traditional space players to think a little bit differently and a more, for lack of a better term, Silicon Valley approach, a little more aggressive, a little more with urgency, per se, and really trying to drive towards maybe a higher level of rapid innovation. And then on the flip side, I see the traditional space guys, as they come into these partnerships, really in a level of maturity and guidance that says, yeah, that's a great idea, and we can go ahead and just throw all that stuff out there. But here's a few things we really need to think about in terms of how we produce these things, in terms of these types of reliability factors and so forth. So really sort of a tempered combination of those things. I think those are the real pros. Obviously, one of the downsides is that's not necessarily a easy transition for either one of those groups, right? So it can create friction that maybe the traditional guys don't necessarily want to move as fast as the NewSpace guys, and vice versa. The traditional guys think the NewSpace guys are too aggressive and too cavalier in terms of paying attention to the risks that exist.
So because we're established space or old space, typically older space, traditional space, they grow up with a lot of government oversight. You're talking about contracts that are solely intended to meet government requirements. And so there's an attendant discipline that accompanies that. You're just not, it's not a free-for-all atmosphere. So you're a company responding to government requirements. It's, I don't want to say it's overly constrained and rigid, but there are rules that you all play by. So when NewSpace enters the market, it's a lot like Neil just said. They energize what you're doing because they just fundamentally think different. You can show them a rule, and the first thing they're going to say is, well, it's kind of a stupid rule. Why do you have to do that? Is there a way around it? And up until you get forced to prove to them why you have to do it, you're going to have to explore the way around it. And so that's what we're finding. All of our relationships with these newer new space companies, they're very productive because they force us to think about stuff differently. And then just like Neil said, once we embrace what they're telling us, then we turn around and we say, okay, there are certain fundamental rules that you have to comply with in government acquisition. And so we sort of enforce discipline on the process where we need to, but at the same time get the benefit of the creativity from the use of this company. So I think it's an excellent marriage. If I had to point to a downside, you're going to be, if you're in the old traditional space company, you're going to have some folks that work for you that are going to resist the carefree attitude of, just embracing a more free-for-all way of thinking. A lot of these folks are career aerospace professionals. They're very, some of them are rigid in their thinking. Well, once they move beyond that, it's a great relationship. The advantages far outweigh disadvantages.
Yes, I share what you said, that the advantages are much greater than the disadvantages. So in the collaboration with new space companies, I see it was said already, but they challenge us on speed. It is little thing like, signing an NDA 1 week or 6 months, for example. It is bigger thing, like, if I take once again the OneWeb example, when the challenge came into our company, which was basically building a satellite for less than €1 million, people began by saying, okay, it's impossible. We had to do it in 3 months, and we did it. So the people who were saying this is impossible, step by step they changed their mind while doing this, and pushed by Greg Weiler and his team. And this has created into the company a tremendous change. So I think we are really pushing our boundaries, and saying what you said already, we are bringing to this company as regards security aspects, for example, as regards certain point in the design process, a certain reliability, a certain, I would say, professionalism, if I may say so, that sometimes they are lacking because they really they're looking for speed and speed and speed. As regards the downsides or whatever, I don't see really a one, it's more like a warning. I think when, as a company like ours, embraces new space, and our CEO is actually very good at that, you should not present, I think, traditional space versus new space. Because this creates in the organization, like, the people who are in and the people who are out or who are too old or whatsoever. Whereas currently, the big share of our revenues is made of traditional clients with traditional space. So what is at stake for managers is more to say, okay, this is a new opportunity. We all want to embark on this, and this is what it will bring positive to the company. So for example, once again on one way, we didn't create a special division. We had exactly, main plant in Toulouse, the same people working both for traditional and for new. And this created into the company, but there was no opposition. I think in the way we work with the company, it's important that this is a common approach and not, building suddenly a new space division that would be opposed and that would also kind of steal talents from the traditional space.
So my colleagues have really spoken to all the pros and cons that I could think of, but I just realized we don't really know the audience that well. I'm curious, at the NewSpace conference, how many of you are actually with NewSpace companies? And traditional space? So it's 65 students. And the students, where do you want to go? Traditional or NewSpace? That's the big upshot. I think Dennis nailed it. NASA, there was a massive problem and an identified study saying that the workforce was aging into the 50s, and there was just nobody coming up behind them to fill it in. And we have lost already a lot of intellectual assets. The common thing to say is that we could not build the Saturn V today if we tried. And I don't know if that's really true, but at least the analogy makes sense to me. So I think NewSpace has brought in a lot of fresh blood, and in that respect, as a recruiting tool, it's very exciting. And then the other thing I would say is, Netflix just posted these amazing results that they are adding something like 15 million new users per quarter, and they're growing internationally, and will be in 200 countries within the next year. I know that because I own a little bit of stock, and I'm very excited. But my point there is there are several case studies that show that Blockbuster saw Netflix coming, saw the new wave of streaming, saw everything, all the and became a footnote in history of disrupted businesses. And so I think joining Alain, there's a bit of a warning there that the traditional space companies and the people that run them can ignore new space companies at their peril. You definitely have to keep an eye on these things and understand that the disruption is not a serious threat until suddenly it is. And I think there are instantiated structural things that make it very hard to turn on a dime. You've got an existing customer base that you have to service. You've got, in many cases, if you're a publicly traded company like we are, many of us are, you've got shareholders to satisfy on a quarterly basis. So, you count, if you're smart, you count on these new space companies to inject the new technology, and then you have to figure out a way to integrate it and make sure that you don't become a calcified relic of the old space world.
Good answers. So I was at SpaceX yesterday morning. They're up to like 5,000 or 6,000 employees. So we can't just use size anymore, I think, as a small space, big space. That's not going to work either. To me, it's about culture. It's about culture. It can be big, and yet they've kept a very NewSpace culture, if you will. And I think Lean and Les, you both talked about culture to a great extent. You mentioned creating a separate entity to really engage and invest in the private sector. About Clayton Christensen, The Innovator's Dilemma. How do big corporations thrive off these disruptions that are coming along? So I guess my question is to explore the culture. And in each of your companies, where do you want to go culturally? I mean, in your old, if you will, culture, failure is not an option. You get the job done. Technically, they're incredible, a little bit costly, but it's incredible capability to do things that the nations and your governments need you to do. At the same time, in the NewSpace culture, it's cheap. We're not sure if we can make the payroll next week. Sorry, I'll buy you lunch. Here's some stock options, maybe. There's excitement. There's innovation. There's enthusiasm. And so on. Where do you want your companies to be in the future? Is it one? Is it the other? Is it a mix or partition? How might that end up? So let's start, David. Here.
I was afraid you were going to start with me. Well, so one thing I look for in terms of anybody I work with, and this I think is important and comes in spades with the NewSpace community, is comfort with ambiguity. A lot of times, if you've been doing something for a while, you want to fit that round peg into a square hole. And if you're coming at it from a different thought process, you question everything. And I think Elon Musk and SpaceX are famous for this. You take everything to the 0th order, ask why, and challenge assumptions. And so that, if you can build that into your culture, I think that's a good thing in any business. And one thing we are particularly saddled with in the space industry is, once you've taken an action to mitigate a risk, like you've added a test or you've added a procedure, you've added whatever, that never ever goes away. It becomes a law of nature. It's embedded deeply in the culture, and people get very nervous if you try and subtract things. So, one thing we found in working with NewSpace and Skybox in particular is, and Keysight is sensitive to this, Neil, maybe you can speak to it, they were very careful about what kind of testing they did. They want to minimize the testing to what is absolutely necessary and place the effort and the resources and the money into tests that matter and not just tests for testing's sake. And I think we're actually pretty good at this too, but as I said, I started my career at JPL on the New Horizons mission actually, with Pluto, and for that kind of thing, the failure analysis is critical because after 2 million miles in 9 years, you really want the thing to work, so everything has to be tested to that degree. But maybe on a CubeSat that's going to LEO, it would be different. So to me, that is got to be baked into the culture, and I think, again, bringing in NewSpace people into the mix in the larger companies is how you solve that.
So, culture. I think we have someone really in common, both the traditional space and NewSpace, which is passion and which is engineering. When I look, at people working together, new and traditional, they are all passionate about that product. This is something we all have in common. And they are all passionate engineers, which means that if you come up with a great challenge, perhaps the first reaction will be that, you're crazy, right? But then you say, okay, let's embark on the challenge, let's work together. And then you see engineers with engineers passionate about this new challenge and working together. And I think this is what we have in common, and this is what makes a lot of fun, or what creates a great excitement when we work together. Then, what is different? Perhaps, and it's exactly what you mentioned, the tolerance for risk, the business models, and you see in the market you're targeting. We are at Airbus Defence and Space, so we build observation satellite, we build communication satellite, but we are not really in relation with the sea, with the customers. Whereas most of NewSpace companies, they have this startup and virtually risk mindset coming from the Silicon Valley, so they're tied at close bundle with customers, with 10x if it's more performance, or if it decreases in the price, or whatsoever. So they are betting on big risks and very high rewards if it works. And for this to work, they are betting on the C market, on the consumer market. And this is something which is really new for us. And this risk tolerance and this new approach to customers, this is what is different. It's not an obstacle, but it's something which is different in the approach we are doing business.
So for us, in the late 1990s, there were a series of, I think it was 3 launch vehicle failures. And they were national security expensive satellites for the National Reconnaissance Office. They all ended up at the bottom of the ocean. It was a huge hit in the United States national security capability when we lost those 2 satellites. I think it was 2010, we launched a satellite, and a 3-star general said to our CEO, you realize that the satellite you just launched replaced the one that you lost 10 years earlier. It takes that long to replace satellites. They're designed to field them from to actually getting the satellite on orbit can be 7 to 10 years. So in traditional space, it's a problem if you want us to go really fast, because we look at that more like, we need to be a little more measured about how we do things. We need to be a little more disciplined because we cannot afford a shortcut anywhere. And I can tell you for ULA, yesterday, we launched our 97th rocket in a row without a failure. That is an unprecedented record in world launch history. And that's because we're extremely disciplined and measured about how we do things. We love the idea of NewSpace and bringing that in there, but we need to do that in a very incremental way. don't upset the apple cart, then all of a sudden you lose a satellite that's worth $1.5 billion or whatever, and it's a one of a kind. I mean, imagine what would have happened if we would have lost the Curiosity rover that was destined for Mars. It's not like you have another 2 or 3 sitting in a barn, just in case you lose one, let's write the other one out and launch that. It's a one of a kind bird. So we're very measured. So I would say the challenge for us is finding the proper mix between NewSpace and how you wed that into your existing processes and systems without losing the reliability. I work with the Pentagon and the White House every day. Those folks are extremely skittish about shortcuts. Do not do anything or you're going to risk the loss of the national security center.
Yeah, I'll follow on a little bit to what David said. In terms of, from an electronic test perspective, electronic design perspective, it really comes back to the point I was making about commercial practices versus traditional aerospace practices. And the balance needs to be driven by the business model. So if you look at the business model of an NRO satellite, it is we are building $1 billion+ satellite, and we are building 1 or 2 of them, and so the risk mitigation plan better be really good, and you build a test process that is designed to beat the risk down to as close to zero as you possibly can. On the flip side, if you're building a constellation of 100 or 200 nanosats, and you have a business plan that says, look, I'm expecting these to have a 2-year lifetime, and actually I have even made an assessment that I could tolerate a 4% risk or a 4% failure rate. Well, now all of a sudden my test process probably looks quite a bit different, and I certainly can't afford to test every single thing and test it over and over and over like I might be doing on an NRO satellite. So you really need to build a test process that fits the business model. And I think David also hit on the point of really you need to develop your design in a way and your early testing in such a way that you understand what are those most likely failure mechanisms and focus your test process around those, and don't spend a lot of time testing the things that have a very low likelihood.
Very good. Well, we're going to open the floor to some comments and questions, so please line up. We'll have microphones on both sides. And while you're getting ready for that, just a comment, and unless, if I may make this, we work with ULA at NASA, and it's amazing to me to see the change recently. And we work with a lot of your great engineers, and they are so much more upbeat right now. They're so much more excited, and they're freer than apparently they thought they were for many years to innovate. And I said, why? And they said, they have a one-word answer: SpaceX. One even had 2 more words. He said, thank you. So there's another interesting interplay, between these two, if you will, sectors or parts of our sector, how one can inspire the other, even though they may not have any interaction between them. One can instill a new way of doing business and spirit in others, hopefully without sacrificing the reliability for which you're so well known. So let's go ahead and open it up. Hi. Wave your hand 3 times. We're going to raise money today by selling. You talk about you know that.
My name is Noah from the University of Colorado Boulder, and I just wanted to know how you guys were competing cost-wise. There's a lot of innovation to move quickly, but there's also a lot of incentive to cost with NewSpace. I just wanted to hear your opinions on how you're competing on that front and on your company.
can go first from the launch community perspective. So, clearly SpaceX is our competitor. You guys can look this up for yourself. They have never, in the national security side of the market, ever launched a payload for the price that's advertised on their website. On the commercial side, they have held their cost targets. They actually launched for the prices advertised. But on the national security side, we've seen some escalation. ULA were a lot more expensive. So what's happening, what we're seeing happen is SpaceX prices we anticipate will increase. ULA's prices, because of the evolution I was talking about to the Vulcan vehicle, we think we need to get down to somewhere between $100 and $110 million for the launch of our lowest version of an Atlas 401 rocket. It was the one that was on the far left of the graph. So we think if we can get that to $100 to $110 million, we will be commercially competitive with SpaceX. It is unknown to how that's going to pan out. I mean, I'm giving you inside baseball here. I don't know if our competitors' prices will continue to increase. I don't know if we're going to maintain our decrease in prices. Right now, we're on a slope where we're going to meet the $100 to $110 million price point. We're on target to do that. We have a plan in place, and we're executing to the plan. We're actually slightly ahead of schedule in our cost reductions, but it's going to take some years to get there. And then it's unknown what will happen with our competitors' prices. But credit to SpaceX that they have had a very positive effect on the marketplace when it comes to prices. I mean, people think that we're competitors with them and we hate each other, and that's not really the case. When they had their failure, our CEO called them up and offered help. If there's anything we can do to help them with their anomaly resolution, we would do that, because it's not a good thing for anybody to fail in the launch industry. So they may be our competitors, but they're also our brethren. So that's what we see.
So from the cost perspective, so we also reacted to SpaceX with creating the joint venture Airbus and Safran, so basically integrating or merging together, on the one hand, the engine manufacturer, on the other hand, the launch integrator. And we are aiming at a reduction of cost of 15% approximately. So that's on the launcher side. And on the satellite side, I would say here we more after talking about the constellation. This is it's a complete new design, it's a complete new supply chain to reach the cost target. And also I very much appreciate what you said to SpaceX. Tom Anders had a meeting with Elon Musk. And the first word he said is, thank you to you, taking the launch industry. And it's true that if we're able to reduce launch, so we'll open the door to a complete new space that will be beneficial to all of us.
This question is for Les Kovacs. I got that right.
Raise my board on that.
One of the most fascinating corporate decisions is for ULA to decide on Blue Origin over Rocketdyne Aerojet with a half-century of proven propulsion, design, and production. Could you explain to all of us why ULA went with Blue Origin for the next generation launch field?
Yeah, sure. So what happened was when we decided that we had to shift gears from the Russian RD-180, we surveyed the marketplace and we said, well, what U.S. Domestic engine provider, what are the products out there that we could put on our rocket? And it basically distilled down to two. Aerojet's AR-1 engine and then Blue Origin's BE-4 engine. And Blue Origin's BE-4 engine had about a 2-year head start, 2 to 3 year head start on Aerojet rocket plan. So to make schedule, to field this rocket as quickly as we want to, we went with Blue Origin. Now, some of the criticism you'll hear out there is that, well, Blue Origin's not an engine house, and Aerojet is. If you go to Blue Origin's factory and go to their test facility in Texas, they have test facilities that rival those of NASA in engine test stands. They are a very competent company. So we are actually still carrying Aerojet as our backup. We're going to make that decision between Blue Origin and Aerojet late in 2016 as to which one we're going to go with. Currently, Blue Origin is the front runner, and Aerojet's AR1 is a risk mitigation strategy for us.
Hi, my name is Deepak. I just graduated from UCSD as the president of SETS group over there. My question is a little bit about the culture between NewSpace and traditional space companies. A lot of the culture, as we can see, drives the environment and energy of the employees. And one reason why I see it is NewSpace companies are a lot more receptive to feedback from employees. And managers can account for that, and that's why they can have a great relationship with employees. I'm not saying traditional space companies don't, but how do you think traditional space companies can be more receptive to feedback, to change quicker than before?
Who wants to take it? No. David's smiling.
If I get fired, you can hire me here. No, I actually think it's a function of size, mostly. It's just purely not NewSpace versus old space, is that when a company gets to a certain size, and I would argue this is the case for SpaceX in many ways, the processes have to be put in place to make the business run, and it necessarily makes a few more layers of insulation between your boss. But I'd say we do actually a pretty good job of listening to people and trying to be responsive to new ideas, and it's a constant struggle, but there's committees and people self-organizing and all kinds of innovative things going on. And if you have, I think probably the most important thing is if you have the, how to put this, kind of just the blessing from up high that that's okay, it tends to take care of itself. That's how we do it. And we were acquired 3 years ago by McDonald Associates, a Canadian. And that created a much more diversified organization that includes SSL now. And so I think that kind of also gave people a little bit of a boost. And so when you have a lot of exciting things going on and you allow people to work on them, which we do, that helps. And by the way, we have SSL people sprinkled throughout the audience. So part of what we do is let them come to conferences like this.
Any other comments?
That's why he gets applause, because those guys are sprinkled.
How many ULA people are here? Equal time here.
Sure. So whenever I get excited about NewSpace around traditional space players, the de facto response is something along the lines of, well, you were watching cartoons during the 90s, you don't know about Teledesic and all these other high-profile. Is NewSpace different, and why?
As a electronics company, electronic test company specifically, maybe put a little different spin on it since we're not purely a space company. But I think if you look at how the technology has evolved since the days of Teledesic, and obviously Teledesic was widely considered to be a failure. But at the same time, I think there's a lot that can be learned from it. And if you look at how far the technology has come, both in terms of cost, capability, and think of it as performance per mass and performance per cost, that's a huge factor. I think what we've been talking about both from SpaceX in terms, and a lot of the earlier panel session on alternative launch vehicles, the price of launch is going down dramatically. So I think the overall cost piece of the business model is much more real now. And the other thing is on the demand side. I think that Teledesic was trying to deploy at the time when what they were providing was really just an alternative to something that really could probably be had in other ways. We're in a situation right now where the demand for data and the demand for transferring data just continues to grow at exponential growth. I read an article a while back that in the next 2 years, we're going to produce as much data as we produced in the entire history of human existence. So that the demand for the data, so I think you have both a demand side element and a cost performance side element that are different. Still hard, I mean, it's still a really hard problem. I think it is.
Very good.
Of course.
Just really quick, thanks for the question. The difference is we have Facebook and Google and Twitter now, so the bottom line business model is not can you sell broadband internet to people, it's can you get more eyeballs on ads. So that's completely upended everything. I'm not sure if we're going to have thousands of satellites beaming internet to every corner of the globe. I don't know, but I think the baseline of the business model is completely different, and so that there's a chance it might succeed based on that.
This is a question submitted online. In the early history of aerospace companies, there was a wide range of company-to-company acquisitions. With more new space companies arising, what do you think the acquisition market will look like? Will the new companies stay independent or be acquired?
Good question.
I have no clear answer to that today. Thank you for the question. It's interesting. What I see on the new space market is the valuation of the company is dramatically high. I mean, if we just take the example of Google buying Skybox for 500 million, it's a lot. And will not buy a company 500 million. I mean, perhaps will do, but that's something we look at. Okay, wow, this is really high prices. So I think there will be very good at this, and the history already proved that. I very much believe in buying some share of the company, some minority stakes, and partnering together. And buying a company, I would say right now, I'm a bit dubious of that because I think we are in a kind of bubble time where you have a lot of new entrants arriving. You have the funds who are looking for exits, so the valuation of the company is higher and higher. Probably in 5 years, you'll see who are the first winners. And I think that would be for us, big players, a good time to buy companies. Because you buy a company when you can do due diligences and when you can have a certain certainty about the business model. And I think today it's too early. It's very promising, but you don't know if it will fly.
Anyone else?
The experience I have is with the nanotech community, and something similar happened in the 2000s where nanotech was a big deal. Everybody had their company name. A lot of money flowed in. If you look back today at what happened 10, 15 years ago, the majority of those companies are gone or absorbed or still working, but on a much lower simmer on, in some cases very mundane things. And what really happened was the larger established companies took the technology that was developed, Sherwin-Williams for paint, for example, and incorporated it into their products, and that was kind of the real output of the nanotechnology revolution at the time.
Very good.
I'm just going to take this off the stand. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of us, especially the younger folks, are interested in new space is because we see the potential for exploration to be more hybrid. Traditionally, it's been the purview of governments. Because all of you on the panel work with these as your customers, what do you think it will take for space exploration to become more privatized? Is it a combination of lower launch costs and markets, or what is it going to take to make that transition?
All right. So keep doing what you're doing. Is step number one. Historically, the government had relatively deep pockets, and so space industry grew up launching government payloads to space. Well, what you're seeing now is what I refer to as the operationalization of space. People are looking at it, specifically those in the private industry, the private sector, and they're saying, well, how can I profit off of space operations? So you're hearing things like, well, let's go mine precious metals off of asteroids and things like that. Let's create a tourism industry to the moon. Or let's create an industry where we're launching people to low Earth orbit, they get their astronaut wings, you charge them X hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that, and it becomes a viable business. So you're moving away from the government model where you're just launching stuff for the government, and now people are looking at this and saying, hey, so this is no different than any other industry where you can make money. And as soon as that takes a foothold, it's just, that then becomes a runaway train. People are going to get motivated in space just like they're motivated in any other industry. And it's going to become order of the day. 20 years from now, it's not going to be that peculiar to have a space startup. I mean, today we call this NewSpace. It's going to become order of the day 20 years from now. Yeah, but you guys in the audience, I mean, the young folks are actually driving this. You're operationalizing what used to be the purview of only a very few companies, largely funded by the government.
Any comments? You might have to yell if the mic's
Oh, it's working. All right. Being that 3 of the companies on the panel are, their space portions are portions of much larger enterprises. Airbus, people think of making planes, and ULA being a member of a JV of companies that aren't just traditionally seen as super into space. Does that make acquisitions, or not even just acquisition, but partnerships and activity, engaging with new space companies, does that make it more difficult that you have shareholders that may not see you as a space company purely, or is it just sort of not more of a non-issue?
It's more of a non-issue. So when we do anything revolutionary, not revolutionary, if we're doing anything out of the norm, we actually meet with our parents, and we run that by our parents. So we had, our executive leadership meets with the leadership of Lockheed and Boeing, and if we're doing the things that you're describing, we actually run that by them and get their approval. So we're a joint venture, and we can't operate in a free-for-all mode. We can't do whatever we want. We don't issue our own stock, so we're beholden to our parents. But we typically make very compelling arguments for things that we want to do, and usually they will approve that. And I don't want to paint a rosy picture. There are times when they say no. No, you're not going to do that. But I mean, it's working out so far. As far as acquisitions, ULA would never be in a position, I don't think, to do that. That's more of a parent question for Lockheed.
Yes, it's also a no-brainer for us. So, 2 examples, when we create our corporate venture fund. So this is on the whole Airbus group, so helicopters, airplanes, space, defense. It was well welcomed by the financial markets. And when we have to do an acquisition or whatsoever, so for example, by web, we invested 250 million in the company. This just went to the strategy department for the whole group, and it is yes or no, but there is a process for that.
This question is for Elaine on Europe. Europe's not a small place. It has a bigger economy than the U.S., has a bigger population, and yet it seems to have a smaller indigenous new space industry. I don't see a SpaceX or an X-Corps equivalent over there. So from your perspective, what's up with Europe? And well, I'm asking because seriously, it would be better for Earth if there was more competition. Okay, and Airbus is the 500-pound gorilla in Europe. What's up with Europe, and what can you do to try to right this?
So first, a very warm thank you for your question. I'm a European, as you can hear in my accent. I'm French living in Germany. And I'm very proud to work for Airbus because this is, I think, one of the biggest successes of Europe. I mean, my grandmother was in a concentration camp in Ravensbrück. My grandfather was a resistant. And I'm now living in Germany, my kids speak German, and I'm working for a company who build weapons together between France and Germany. And this is for me every day a very big and concrete sign of peace between our two countries. So sorry for this introduction, but I think Europe is something I really have in my heart, and with a certain number of people we are pushing to create this new space ecosystem also in Europe. Now, why is it difficult? First, look where NewSpace appeared. Here in Silicon Valley, it appeared also in Seattle, it appeared also in LA. But it appeared basically where you had this ecosystem with the Silicon Valley mindset. And if you just take one step back and you look, how much money is invested, you have $25 billion invested in Silicon Valley, which is approximately 1/3 of the venture capitalist money invested throughout the world. So you have the mindset, you have the money. In Europe, yes, if you look at a very big point of view, it's a bigger economy, so you say, okay, you should have bigger pockets, but actually it's 27 countries if you take the European Union. So it means a lot of people will have to agree on what we should do. So ESA, so European Space Agency, for example, you need to agree with all, not 27, but anyhow, all these countries to do something. So it makes things a bit slower, more complicated, and we are also lacking the venture capitalist industry. Of course we have venture capitalist industry, but we're lacking the critical mass. And we don't have Googles in Europe. We don't have the Twitter and etc. etc. So this is why we are here in the Valley actually, is to say we want to create this new space ecosystem in Europe. But we like to do it together with the US and taking back to Europe this push, this mindset, this risk taking, and also some of the money. Because we are no, but let's be pragmatic, right?
Okay, very good. And I'm sorry, I just got the red flag of death, so sorry. But you get with the panelists after the session if you want to, if they're available to have more dialogue. This has been a real topic, very apropos, I think, for the new space industry. There's so much we can learn from the established aerospace companies and vice versa. And it's really great from where I sit at NASA, where we promote commercial space, to see the hybrid of the two working together, such as in ULA and many other companies, really trying to create some partnerships to do the things they cannot do by themselves. So anyway, thank you for your attention, and thank you to our great panel.
We will now be meeting, and I think the biggest signal to all of you of that is that we are building the Skybox constellation. So we've been engaged with them since before the Google acquisition, and they came to us through a competitive process where we were competing with your typical satellite manufacturers and some smaller upstart ones. And I'm going to make a little bit of a commercial for us, but the CEO, when at the celebration ceremony, came in and told us the reason we chose you guys is because we felt you were the most agile. You matched our culture and our drive and the way we do things more than anyone else. New space, old space, large, small, and that's why you selected us. So I'm very proud of that and I'm looking forward to commercial for it. The exciting thing there is that Sky production facility is up and running, and we have a license from Skybox to manufacture the satellites or other applications that don't compete. So, I think this is a theme across the industry. There are going to be a lot of platforms available. You can compare them to the iPhone or to your favorite, Valley flavor of the month. But the fact that there's a tested, repeatable, cost-effective set of platforms available to entrepreneurs is probably the biggest game changer in the industry right now. Because you don't have to be a space junkie, You don't have to be an aerospace engineer. You don't have to be anything special except someone with a business plan that happens to occur or have a component in space. And I'll conclude by saying we're seeing a lot of those come out of the woodwork. So we're seeing vendors of components for sure, and they come to large satellite manufacturers first because we're a potential. We love talking to those folks. But we're also seeing people who have really new, non-traditional, emerging
experience. Last but not least is Neil Curran, not least because he had a hand in sponsoring this panel. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. He is the NewSpace Business and Market Development Manager of Keysight Technology. So he actually is the only one that has NewSpace in his title. That tells you. So we're moving along. NewSpace is getting some recognition. His personal background is in digital signal processing and communications, and he's held a variety of positions involved with Hewlett Packard, starting about 20 years ago, and moved on as things evolved, and today is looking at how Keysight can work with the new space sector. So we have a great panel, looking forward to it, and so the format today will ask each 5 minutes or so introduction with your perspectives. Then we'll have a little conversation here in the panel and some Q&A finally from the audience. So I'd like to get started. Let's just go from right to left. We'll start with it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate the kind introduction. So, in many ways, SSL, Space Systems Loral, formerly known as Space Systems Loral, is a hidden gem in Silicon Valley. I think even before I worked there, I did not know much about it, and I've been at NASA Ames across the freeway. So it's up the road in Palo Alto. It's about 3,000 people, $2 billion in revenue, and what most people don't know is in between Apple and Google and Facebook and the next generation of Silicon Valley upstarts is this 58-year-old satellite company, and soup to nuts, in a high bay in the middle of Palo Alto. So I also don't like the term old space. I don't much appreciate the term new space either. I think we're all part of
some of the bigger companies who are smart enough to realize that new space is an important asset for their companies and how they view this. And then when we get into questions, we want to hear your thoughts too on trends. So I want to introduce my panel, starting from the far right, David Blackner, SSL, the company that Space Systems Loral, big satellite manufacturer. David, though, has got an extremely rich background, both in the business and technical side. He's been at NASA, at Ames, at JPL as well, the Stanford Research Institute. He's the director of the Golden Spike, so he has his hand in this space as well. A lot of great experience in these issues. Next to David, Elaine Kubik, is that right? Elaine Kubik. You have the coolest title I think I've ever seen. She's with Airbus Defense and Space, and Helen's title is the head of Transversal Innovation. That's awesome. I love that. But part of her job responsibility is to figure out how Airbus will partner with small companies. And so, your position is perfect for this panel. Next to Helen is Kovacs. Les is from United Launch Alliance, the Washington office, where he leads the relationship that they have with the executive branch, the White House, NASA, DoD, Commerce, et cetera. Les has a lot of great experiences outside of Washington, such as at the missile silos in Cape Canaveral and so on, doing launch operations. Was with Orbital Sciences, of course now Orbital ATK, as operations manager for the X-34, and for a subject I love dearly, the Antares launch vehicle operations at Waller. So a lot of
accomplishments. He led the business team in both COTS investment rounds and Program Office. Here to now lead a panel focusing on the emerging cooperation between space and Mr. Dennis Stone.
It's always great to do this after lunch when everybody's kind of going, Anyway, thanks for stopping in to digest and perhaps not only your lunch, but some interesting dialogue on a very interesting trend in our industry today. Our industries, because some would say we have the new space industry, and many of you are a part of that. Small, vibrant young companies that hope someday to become vibrant big companies working in the space area, and what we should probably call traditional aerospace. I don't like old space. It doesn't have a nice complementary ring to it, so we'll try to avoid that term. But traditional companies tend to be big, very talented, much experience, more expensive, very different world. And the trend that we've seen, I've seen, I think you've all seen, in the last decade, has been cooperation on occasion between NewSpace and traditional aerospace companies. And it's something new, it's something exciting, it's something different, and it could be very powerful. So the purpose of today's panel is to kind of step back. I mean, let's talk about some of the specific deals and things that are going on, but try to step back and look at this trend. You know, where did it come from? Where is it today? Where is it going? Is it good? Is it bad? What are the potentials? And what are some of the challenges and risks associated with that? And so to do that, since again, most of you are with the new space sector, we wanted to focus on the views of this coming from
the space industry. And you don't, see in biotechnology, new biotech and old biotech, you just see biotech, and there are different flavors of biotech. So, I like to think of this as a successful, commercial, revenue-producing aerospace company. And in the big scheme, they're very interested in, I'll use the term for lack of a better one, in new space, because it's bringing a new level of dynamism to the industry, and it's indeed forcing us to look at things a little bit differently. So our primary business is 99% commercial. We don't do much in the way of government contracts, although I'll talk about a few. We build large, high-power geostationary communication satellites for what is arguably the most commercially successful business that is based in space, and that is beaming entertainment down to you. So your Sirius, your Dish TV, your Direct TV, your internet, even your cable service runs at some point through a satellite, and at some point, often a satellite built by SSL or the community of satellite manufacturers. And most people don't know that almost every that you interact with at some point in the chain goes to a satellite. And I have to say that the SSPI, the Satellite Professionals Organization, that is, by the way, opening up his Silicon Valley chapter, has a great video out there that describes to you and at the level of your kids and your family what satellites do every day for the community and humanity in general. So it's worth checking out if you want to understand the massive impact that I think most people don't realize satellites make. So again, we've been around 58 years. We build these large satellites, but we're very aware of and engaged with new space